Hello, everyone. Hello, both. I see I have two people watching. And of course, as is normal for me, Candy the Wonder Pup going crazy. It didn't work yesterday. Hopefully, she gives me peace for the whole time. Okay, she's too excited. She doesn't want affection. She wants her sit, shake a paw. Oh, both paws. Okay, come up. There you go. And hopefully, I have peace. And now I see I have nobody watching. I thought a dog, if anything, I would think a dog would increase the level of engagement, not decrease it. But I know stuff happens, and she won't let me. She won't give me any peace until she gets that. It's a Pavlovian response. Now the video goes on. She's like salivating. Here comes my treat. And this video is that bell that Pavlov used to ring. It's Gordon Causey, as always. Gordy Canuck on Twitter, Grow a Set on Reddit. And today it's no longer Tuesday. We are now Wednesday, the 10th of May, and the time is 12:18. So I was a minute or two late in coming on, and I apologize for that. I posted that I'd be starting this at 12:15. I am going to endeavor to stay focused on this video, but I'm making no promises because this is such a all-encompassing topic that's going to be incredibly challenging. Before I really get rolling, likes, shares, subscriptions, all welcome. I can't believe I'm up to 101 or 2 subscribers on this miserable and pathetic little YouTube channel. But at least it's nice to know that there are at least a few people who are tuning in. And it does, it's appreciated. Anyway. Basically, why control? I've titled this "Why Controlling the Narrative" on so many issues like COVID or health-related issues, climate, identity. Why controlling the narrative on these issues is so imperative in today's world. And broadly speaking, what I'm talking about is censorship. We've seen an unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime, level of censorship in the world today about what is allowed to be said and what is not allowed to be said on, we certainly saw it over the top on COVID, but we're seeing the same thing now on anything related to gender identity, on anything related to climate. There's only one approved story, only one approved narrative. And if you dare to hold an opinion that runs counter to that narrative, well, within the context of a YouTube video, I risk my videos being taken down and my voice removed from this public square for a week. And then if it happens again within a prescribed period of time, then it can be a month, and then 3 strikes and you're out, and you can have your channel completely removed. For myself, this channel isn't monetized. I'm just feel compelled to add my voice to the public discourse and to give voice to opinions which are quite often being trampled down. And that bothers me. And I say it's at an unprecedented level. In my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. Not to this degree, but I have seen it. It has happened before. When I saw it happen before, it would have been maybe the 80s. And there was generally speaking, it was the right wing at that time. Those who were identified as being on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, who were advocating for censorship, particularly around the banning of certain books, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and other titles, Slaughterhouse-Five, I think it is, by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. All of the aforementioned books I have read. And part of the impetus behind me reading them, especially books like Slaughterhouse and Catcher in the Rye, is because people were trying to censor it. People didn't want me to read it. And Kurt Vonnegut famously said that, one of the best things that ever happened to him was Slaughterhouse-Five being deemed, being targeted by certain groups. They wanted it removed from libraries, removed from schools, and then the sales of his books went way up. It speaks back to that familiar old line about no fruit is so desirous as that which is forbidden. No fruit is so sweet as that which is forbidden. When I do these videos, quite often the one I just finished, my most recent video, will springboard me into the next one. That's what's happened here. In the last video, I was talking about Jesus touching a leper and about the unchanging nature of Scripture. I'll start off by finishing where I finished there. You can read that story in Luke, I think it's chapter 5, I forget the verses, Luke 5:12-16. That's a reference to where Jesus physically touches a leper in healing him. And if you read it 5 years ago, Jesus touched the leper. If you read it yesterday, Jesus touches the leper. Read it today, Jesus touches the leper. Read it next year, 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't change. But in today's world, everything is changing like crazy. And I'll start off by, I think this is part of our human nature, though. And this is the reason why there is such a concerted effort to control the narrative and to censor out any dissenting views. And it plays to our human nature, and it goes back to when we were kids. We learned the importance of controlling the narrative, of walking in step with the crowd. Now there's fashion, there's music. Conformity is part of human nature. There's a great scene in a movie called Dead Poets Society. It starred Robin Williams, must have been the 90s. And Robin Williams' character, he's a professor of English literature, of poetry, and he takes the kids out into a quad, out into a courtyard type area. And he picks out, I think it's 4 of the students, and he asks them to march around this quad area in a circle. And they do. And as the scene plays out, the kids fall into step and they start almost in militaristic fashion walking together. His students about conformity, how quickly they all fell in line. And then he says, and what happens in the scene is that as the kids the 4 are walking around the quad, the remainder of the class watching starts clapping to the beat of their step. Up, 2, 3, 4. And Robin Williams said, to those of you who say, I would have fell in line, I would have walked differently, I would have been different, why were you clapping? It's part of our human nature. And for those in positions of authority who have vested interests in certain outcomes, then controlling the narrative is vital. When we were kids, the commodity that we sought was often popularity, or at least peer acceptance. We wanted to be accepted by our peers. I would argue that now the stakes are exponentially higher. It's not just about acceptance. There is, Well, those in power and authority want to exert that power and authority, and controlling the narrative is vital. I'll start off by talking about March of 2020. And in March of 2020, why, I'm going to ask the question, why was questioning the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the virus which causes COVID, why was questioning the origins of this virus not allowed? Nobel Prize winning virologist, a gentleman now deceased, Dr. Luc Montagnier, Nobel Prize winner, won the Nobel Prize for isolating, identifying HIV, the virus which causes AIDS. So an eminently qualified virologist very early on expressed the expert opinion that SARS-CoV-2 could not have occurred organically in nature, that this was not that it had all the markings of an engineered virus, of something that came out of a lab. And immediately that was vilified, trashed. He was deemed a quack. His reputation was attacked. He was spreading misinformation, we were told. Even the Lancet, one of the most eminent medical journals in the world, jumped in and referred to any competing origin stories as being baseless conspiracies and misinformation. And you weren't, now why? I think it's important to ask the question, why could you not question? I will submit this is the reason I believe. I'm not saying it's factual, and I hope YouTube's community standards won't stomp down on me just because I'm expressing a non-expert opinion about why outlets like our tech companies, like our media, like our government officials, why they wouldn't allow this alternative view, which is now widely believed, why they wouldn't allow it then? Because where does it lead you? If the virus was created in a lab, that leads to the question of, to what purpose? Why are you creating a novel coronavirus in a lab? Which further leads to the question, was it released intentionally? Was this created with the intention for it to be released? Which then leads to the question of, if it was intended to be released, then is the response that we are experiencing, lockdowns, mandates, and all the rest, is this, instead of a pandemic, should we insert an L in the place between the P and the A? Open question. That's my belief. That's why I believe you were not allowed to question it at that juncture, because it would have led to questioning it would have ultimately led to questioning the response. And you weren't allowed to question the response either. Because they're a pandemic, if you put an L between the P and the A, it means that, are we following a script? Now, it's not just on health-related matters that there's one approved narrative that is allowed to be expressed. If we look at climate change, something I've spoken about often before, the one accepted, approved narrative is that human activity on planet Earth, the emission of greenhouse gases, with carbon being the most infamous villain, is contributing to a warming of the planet, and that it is going to lead to catastrophic results, and that anything and everything that can be done must be done to stop this activity, which is warming the planet. I've brought it up on many occasions, and anyone can fact check this. Please do. And comment away if you think I'm wrong. But I would invite you to look into a period referred to as the medieval warming period, which is said to have started around 950 AD and extended right into the 300 or the 1300s. I'm sorry for the mistake. From 950 AD to about 1300, give or take. So a 300 to 400 year long period of climactic warming. And what happened was that the Vikings were able to establish settlements, permanent settlements that lasted for generations in Greenland because it was a green land. And then following the medieval warming period, we went into another period referred to as the Little Ice Age and global cooling, and those same settlements had to be abandoned. Was that man-made climate change? We will be told, you will be told, they will say, well, that was natural. This going from warming and cooling periods, that was natural. Now it's unnatural. Now it's because of human activity and specifically, greenhouse gases targeting the main villain is always said to be carbon, which is a trace element in the atmosphere. And I would invite you to look it up. I'm not sure if it's 0.2 or 0.3, 0.2, 0.3% of the Earth's atmosphere. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. But this trace little element is going to render the planet Earth unlivable. And so drastic action is warranted. And when the media does give voice to alternative views, they use the classic straw man fallacy. They pick out the most egregious person they can, the most ridiculous person they can to espouse views counter to the approved narrative to make it look foolish. I saw the same thing in the COVID era. What happened was Malahide Township is an area near London, Ontario, very Amish, very Mennonite in makeup. A lot of people from Germanic, Dutch, Mennonite, and Amish communities. A lot of them are there, both old order, reformed, and conservative. And they had the lowest vaccination rate in all of Ontario. It was either the lowest or very close to the lowest. And so CBC News went and did a story and trying to investigate why it was so low in this area. And on the pro-vaccination side, they spoke to a family doctor and to that health district's medical health officer. And they gave the reasons supporting vaccination. And when they went to the counter side, did they talk to Dr. Byram Bridle, who's not far away at the University of Guelph and recognized as one of Canada's leading experts on vaccines? I mean, the Ontario government, our Department of Health, had paid him through his lab. They paid his lab $200 and something thousand because they wanted his expert opinion on the vaccines that were under development in 2020. Did they go to him? Did they go to Geert Vanden Bossche, one of the world's leading experts who's headed on vaccines, who's headed up programs for Gavi, the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunizations? Did they ask that gentleman? Did they ask Dr. Michael Yeadon, who's former vice president and chief science officer for Pfizer? No. Who did they speak to? They spoke to a gentleman who sounded like an Eastern European immigrant who was playing with a 2-3-year-old, swinging them around while he talked to a reporter, and they talked to a pastor from a local church. That's classic straw man fallacy. You there are eminently qualified individuals who they could have spoken to, who could have provided a reasoned and intelligent and educated expert point of view. But no, we're not going to talk to them. We're going to talk to a pastor who's not a doctor or has no degrees in science, and some guy who speaks English as a second language, or maybe even a third language. It's ridiculous. This world is getting scary. The degree of censorship which is going on is frightening. But because people are conditioned, it's part of our human nature to conform. It's only going to be a scant few of us who are even going to notice. And many don't even notice it now, because whatever the CBC Nightly News, CNN tells them to believe, they believe. And so they don't notice the censorship, and they applaud the authorities for keeping that misinformation away from them. I know what's right because I listen to CBC News. I've been programmed properly. These people over here, like people like me, have not been properly programmed. If they would just tune into CBC News, shut off their brain and listen and obey, everything would be fine. It's unbelievable. I'm going to, when we get on to transgenderism, I'm going to share something. I participate in a forum on Reddit. I'm not a hyper, not on there all the time, but every now and again I go on to the subreddit Christianity. And, Reddit's tagline is dive into anything. And a post had gone up in this subreddit Christianity, and it shared an article. The post, I'm gonna read what the post said in the subject line, and it was this: Matt Walsh's vitriolic anti-trans Christianity is distinctly anti-Christian. Right-wing commentator Matt Walsh has made a name for himself with his relentless, religious-inflected trans bashing. He is a bad thinker and a bad Christian. Now, I didn't know the name Matt Walsh. I did click on the article. I didn't read much of it. I scanned it. But I looked at his picture and I recognized the individual, and I was pretty sure I'd seen some videos of him. I went onto YouTube, listened to some of his rhetoric, some of his views, and it was the one and the same. And honestly, I didn't find his views to be trans bashing. I didn't think he was a bad thinker. I wasn't even aware that I don't know that he's a professing Christian. If he is, great. But this is what I wrote on my response, the comment I put up in this Reddit thread. Bear with me, I'll read it. To be perfectly candid, I'm not familiar with the name Matt Walsh, but looking at his picture in the attached article, I do believe I've come across videos of him speaking and interacting on this subject of transgenderism. So with that being said, does anyone have a specific example, ideally backed up by a video clip or a reliable and quoted source of him saying something they view as, quote, bad thinking, or that exemplifies him as being a bad Christian? Let's just look at what is let's just look at what is referred to as gender affirming care, which was something I saw in the article. Many, myself included, view the dosing of puberty blocking drugs to a child confused about their gender identity. Many view this as wrong. Likewise, with surgeries that mutilate the human body, that treat healthy organs and tissues as if they're diseased. Call it transgenderism or gender confusion, whatever term you prefer. The fact is that it's nothing new. There have always been men who see themselves as women, and likewise women who see themselves as men. I didn't write it, but I could have said boys who see themselves as girls and girls as boys. But only recently has the pharmaceutical industry and surgical techniques existed where something could be done about it. But just because we have the ability to do something, that doesn't mean we necessarily should. In an unrelated example, fracking gave us the ability to extract previously inaccessible crude oil from rock formations. But whether or not having the ability to do it means we should proceed is another matter. Fracking brought about damage in the years following its implementation. Poisoning of the environment. There were earthquakes in places like Oklahoma, and that caused many to call for a halt to fracking. Then just because someone has a different opinion from you doesn't make them necessarily make them evil. That was my comment. It was downvoted twice, big deal. But I got my comment was removed. First warning, please consider this an official warning not to break our rules in the future. Continuing to break our rules will result in additional moderation action taken against your account, leading to a permanent ban for persistent rule breaking. And I broke Rule 1.3, removed for violating our rule on bigotry. I'd shared the link to my comment, but it's been removed. So, and I'm sorry if you want to, but if anyone can point out to me what in that 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraph comment was bigoted, I would love to hear it. But transgenderism, this notion that gender identity is a societal construct, and that an individual's subjective feelings about how they identify supersedes any biological reality. That's the only thing you're allowed to say in today's world. And if you don't, you're out. You're done. You're an outcast. And, you know, climate, if you go against the narrative, you're done. You're out. You're silenced. You're ridiculed in so many areas. And this, at its core, is fascism. Fascism is a dictatorial system that shares a common element with another authoritarian type system called communism, where the control of the messaging and the thinking and the opinions of the populace is of paramount importance. And I find it incredibly ironic that so many who consider themselves or will label themselves as being anti-fascist, Antifa, as they call themselves, engage in fascist style behavior. I think it was about 2 years ago that an individual, David Rubin, who some will know the name, he hosts a podcast, and he's a former, he used to be on another podcast called The Young Turks, which is viewed typically as a progressive left-leaning podcast, but he left it to do his own. And he went to give a talk in Hamilton, Ontario. I believe it was at Mohawk College, and it resulted in protests. And here's the ironic thing: the so-called Antifa protesters who were there to protest his exercising his right to free speech engaged in classic fascist behavior. They masked themselves. There's one video clip that got shared widely where an elderly man and his even elderly mother were trying to cross the street while these thugs, they would have fit in perfectly well if they were wearing brown shirts in Germany in the 1930s with the way they were behaving. They screamed profanities and tried to physically block. They didn't try. They physically blocked this elderly man and his even elderly mother from crossing the road, wanting to prevent them from going to listen to, and here's the ultimate irony, a gay Jewish man. They claim to be anti-fascist, but in claiming to be anti-fascist, they're seeking to prevent people from listening to a man who is gay and Jewish. If that's not irony, I don't know what is. I'm going to wrap this up because I've gone over 30 minutes now, just over 10. I wanted to read a bit of scripture because this is predicted in the Bible. God's word predicts this. Jesus told us that we should expect this. And for those like myself who are not going to bow down and cave in and are going to continue to assert truth and going to continue to cling to our God-given right and our God-given liberties, scary times are coming. So I'm reading from Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 16. I don't know how far I'll go. I think we'll see how far I go. So once again, this is Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. He's speaking to his disciples. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear testimony before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you up, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who will speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver up brother to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. The other one I wanted to read is from Romans. I bookmarked it, but really not a very effective bookmark. Got it. And it's Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And this speaks to conformity. Romans chapter 12. I'm going to read verse 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brethren. Paul is writing to the church at Rome. And this would have been in the first century. Maybe the year 50, 60, somewhere around there. So meaning 10, 20, 30 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And Paul writes to this church, I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice. And I've gone on now for over 33 minutes. I'll keep it under 35. I guess the closing part of my video tonight is to say that things are going to get worse. I hope my video doesn't get taken down. I do think I have something to contribute to the dialogue in the public square, which is what YouTube is. YouTube, Facebook, Reddit. These, sadly, these are the public square in today's world. And Christians are to be in the public square, and we are to proclaim the truth. And the enemy will always try to bully, intimidate, frighten us. And, we are lambs among wolves. So I'm trying to stay within the bounds so that, I don't want to talk. I didn't touch at all upon the jabs, really. Just relating how the CBC News reported on it with respect to Malai Township. But I'll leave it there, and we'll talk to you again. If you want to share some comments about your thoughts on the degree of censorship in today's world, I'd love to see if anyone actually thinks censorship is a good idea. Who, if they think Voltaire's famous quote where he said, and I remember when the left used to champion Voltaire when it was those books I mentioned being censored or attempted to be censored. The left would cite Voltaire's famous utterance of, "I may not agree with that which you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Does it all just depend on what is being said? I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist. If I want the right to proclaim that which I believe to be true and to express my opinions, I can't take that right away from someone else, even if I disagree with them. If someone ever wants to talk to me about transgenderism, and I do have these conversations on occasion with people live. One particular young lad I work with, we talk about it from time to time because I have a different perspective. Not saying I'm right or wrong, but I do believe I'm right. So anyway, I'm rambling. God bless everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Ending the stream.